Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Shalom, everybody. Is everybody glad to keep the Torah and know Yeshua?
Yes.
Hallelujah. This is the greatest blessing from the Father that we can have, to know Him as He is, to know His own Messiah, and to be able to keep His commandments. So I want to start with a prayer before I share with you a prophetic word of the end of days. So let us stand up for one moment and let us pray. Father, we just come before you in the name of Yeshua. We seek your blessing, Father. We seek your word. We seek your protection, Father. I ask you that you prepare our hearts tonight to receive this message. I ask you that your Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit, will fill this room, will fill our hearts, Abba, will fill our bodies, Father, for we are your temple, Father. I ask you that you surround each one of us with your shield of fire, with your Ruach HaKodesh, Father. You cover us completely with the blood of Mashiach. No weapon against us can prosper, Father. No attack against this building, Father. No attack against this fellowship, Father. I ask you that your Ruach will flow in us, Father. Just fill us with wisdom and understanding as we are approaching the end of days, Father. Prepare us to be this bride that you are looking for, this bride that is going to dress in white and will go to the wilderness, Father. Write in the tablets of our hearts, Father, your perfect commandments, that we will be able to make exploits for you in the end of days, Father. Keep us in humility, Father. Help us to walk in your mercy, in your law, and in the light of Yeshua, Father. Help us to understand your plan, the perfect plan you have for us in the end of days, Father. And guide us always in the straight path, which is the path of Yeshua, Father. Bless each one of us here, Father. I ask you that you bless all my brothers and sisters, Father, that you will bless them with wisdom and understanding, Father, that we will be able to keep all your Torah and we will do everything Yeshua is telling us to do, Father. Protect also those that are being persecuted. We know there's a persecuted assembly in the Middle East, Father. We intercede for them. We ask you for Israel. There are many that still don't know you in Israel, Father. I ask you that you will do a mighty move of the Spirit in Israel, and many will come to Yeshua, Father. I also ask you for your protection about the assemblies in Asia. There is great persecution there, Father. Help us to sympathize with their affliction and to pray for them, Father, also for the congregations in Africa, in Europe, in Australia, and in America, Father, that there will be redemption and escape for your bride in all the world, Father. Help us and protect us and bless us, Father. In the name of Yeshua, we praise you. Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah. Well, shalom to you, brothers. I am a friend of brother Chris and Alicia. I met them in the last Sukkot gathering, and it was a really blessed time to meet them and to meet other brothers as well. My name is Brother Levi. I am a Messianic minister. I've been a Messianic pastor. And some years ago, Father called me to go to Israel to witness to the Jewish people about Yeshua fulfilling all the prophecies of the Messiah. We had a ministry in Israel, me and my wife, for about 5 years. And we had a community on Mount of Olives. We were witnessing to the Jewish people about Yeshua in the Mashiach. He fulfilled absolutely all the prophecies of Mashiach. And also we were witnessing to the Christian brothers about the Hebrew roots of the New Testament. Yeshua didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So in 2009, Father called me to go to Mexico to establish a Messianic congregation, and I was a pastor in that congregation for almost 1 year. And he gave me a vision in 2011 that the end of days was coming, and he called me to go to South America and get a place ready because difficult times are ahead. So I obeyed the call of the Father, of Elohim, and I went to South America. And he told me to go to the wilderness and rent a cabin for several months because he was going to talk to me and to my wife. So he wanted me to be in a clean place, in a distant place. So I prayed, and Father guided me to find this cabin by the river in the wilderness of South America. And me and my wife, we were praying for about 7 months. We were also fasting. We were, during those 7 months, keeping the feast of Passover and Tabernacles. And on the 7th month, Father gave me a revelation. This revelation is a harbinger, a prophecy concerning the future of America, the future of Israel, and the future of the end of days remnant. So we're going to begin with Isaiah 19. This is the prophecy that Father revealed to me. So if you want to open your scriptures, we're going to go to Isaiah 19. Isaiah 19, I'm going to give you a little archaeological background and prophetic background on Isaiah 19. Isaiah 19 is a harbinger before ancient Egypt was destroyed. Ancient Egypt was the most powerful nation on earth, and it was the breadbasket of the entire Middle East. Most of the trade was concentrated on Egypt, and Isaiah 19 talks about before Babylon, before ancient Babylon, 26 centuries ago, conquered Israel and Lebanon and Egypt and the entire Middle East with the Ammonites and Moabites and the Assyrians. There was a prophetic sign, and the prophetic sign is that the Nile River was going to dry up. The Nile River was the breadbasket of Egypt, and Egypt was the breadbasket of the entire Middle East. So whenever we are approaching judgment, the Father judges the staff of bread, which means the agricultural industry goes down, so there's a famine, so people repent and look for Him. And also He judges the economy. So 26 centuries ago, we had a prototype of the Third World War. We had a prototype of the end of days Armageddon, which in the end of days Armageddon, we know that there will be a new world system. There will be 10 kingdoms. All the nations are going to become one, and then that's when the anti-Mashiach, the Antichrist, will rule the world. But 26 centuries ago, there was a very interesting harbinger before Babylon became the new world order, or the new world power back then. So I'm going to read you Isaiah 19. We're going to read Isaiah 19:1 all the way to 19:10. Isaiah 19:1, it says, the burden of Egypt. Behold, Yah El Shaddai rides upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt. And the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they shall fight each one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst of them, and I will destroy the counsel of them, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to those who have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And I shall deliver the Egyptians into the hand of a cruel ruler, and a fierce king shall rule over them, says Yah El Shaddai, Yah the Almighty. And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the rivers shall be waste and dry up. And they shall turn to the rivers far away, and the brooks of the fence shall be empty and dry up. The reeds and rushes shall wither away. The vegetables by the brooks, by the mouth of the Nile, and everything sown by the Nile shall become dry. Be driven away and shall be no more. The fishers also shall lament, and all those who cast hook into the river shall mourn. And they who spread nets upon the waters shall languish. Moreover, those who work in fine flax and those who weave networks shall be confounded, and its foundations shall be crushed in pieces. All the wage workers shall be grieved in their soul. So, when I was reading Isaiah 19, after several months of prayer and fasting, Father spoke to me and he told me that this harbinger is not just about ancient Egypt, but it's also about the end of days Egypt. And he showed me that, as I shared with you a moment ago, ancient Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. The Nile River was the most fertile section of ancient Egypt. And ancient Egypt had a main capital in the Middle South, which was called Memphis. This city was a center of trade. They had the biggest textile industry in the Middle East. They had all the cotton fields, as Isaiah 19 prophesies. They had the flax fields that were destroyed because of the drought. Also, ancient Memphis had a very prominent fishing industry and a paper industry. Most of the papyrus to produce books was produced in ancient Memphis. So also by Memphis, that was the main breadbasket of Egypt. They had many crops on the sides of the Nile River. And Isaiah prophesied that when the Nile dries up, the economy of Egypt will be destroyed. And also it says that this is the time when Egyptians were going to be fighting against Egyptians. Well, this harbinger actually took place when Pharaoh Prius was in charge. He's one of the last pharaohs of Egypt. And he betrayed Israel. He betrayed Israel when Israel went to war with Babylon. So Ezekiel gives us a prophecy about the fall of Pharaoh, because it says that Pharaoh was a staff of reed. That when Israel tries to lean on Pharaoh, Pharaoh is like this very weak staff of reed that breaks and splinters the hand of Israel. So eventually, because Egypt betrayed Israel, Egypt fell into judgment, and there were big economical judgments when Pharaoh Prius was in charge. So what Pharaoh Prius did is that he brought foreign armies, mercenaries from Greece to quench the local revolts in Egypt and to bring stability in his kingdom. But eventually, when the drought in the Nile intensified, a civil war broke out and Egypt was weakened. Egypt became a very weak nation, and that's when Babylon used this opportunity to defeat the entire Egyptian army and to become the new world order or the new world power 26 centuries ago. So when I was reading this prophecy, Father spoke to me and he told me that, as I said to you, this prophecy has to do with ancient Egypt, but also has to do with the end of days Egypt. Prophecy has different dimensions: past, present, and future. So there are different levels of fulfilling. And he showed me that ancient Egypt was divided by the Nile River, and 1/3 of the territory of Egypt was east of the Nile, and 2/3 of the territory were west of the Nile. And towards the middle of the Nile, they have again the city Memphis with all the textile industry and paper industry and agricultural industry. And this industry was damaged because of the drought. So when Father showed me this points or facts about Egypt, he told me, I'm going to show you who is the end of days Egypt. He showed me a map of United States. And he told me the United States is divided by the Mississippi River. Ancient Egypt was divided by the Nile River. 1/3 of the territory of Egypt was east of the Nile and 2/3 west of the Nile. So 30%, about 33% of the territory of the United States is east of the Mississippi, and 66% of the U.S. territory is about west of the Mississippi. Towards the middle south of the Mississippi, we have a city called Memphis, Tennessee. Now, interestingly, ancient Memphis was a center of trade, the same modern Memphis. Ancient Memphis was the capital of the textile industry. They had most of the cotton fields, linen fields, the paper industry, the papyrus was produced in ancient Memphis, and there was a prominent fishing industry, and that was the breadbasket of ancient Egypt. Interestingly, modern Memphis used to be the capital of cotton. They used to have all the cotton fields. There was a very prominent textile industry. They had also flax fields. They produced linen as well. They also produce paper. There's also a prominent fishing industry because of the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi River is the breadbasket of America. Interestingly, America is one of the main breadbaskets of the world. So, as we are approaching the end of days, Father always keeps his pattern, and he brings judgment on the economy. We see how gold and silver have reached historical levels in the last 7-8 years. We have seen economical havoc worldwide. And in 2012, when I was given this prophecy, interestingly, there was an historical drought in the Mississippi. The Mississippi began to dry up, and well, the cotton fields were affected, as Isaiah 19 says, the flax fields, the paper industry, the fishing industry, the agricultural industry. So when the Father showed me this, he showed me that ancient Memphis was a center of idolatry. They used to worship idols of fertility because of the Nile River. And he showed me a prophetical aspect of modern Memphis that I'm going to show you right now. It's very interesting that there is this pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee, exactly by the Mississippi River, as ancient Egyptians used to have also pyramids where they used to worship idols of fertility by the Nile River. Now, at the entrance of this pyramid, we have a statue of Pharaoh Ramses II, that according to secular archaeology is the Pharaoh that oppressed the children of Israel, and eventually the children of Israel needed to leave Egypt. Now, when the drought took place in ancient Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Apries. Apries was a tyrant, and he brought mercenaries from Greece to oppress his people. And eventually, during the time of Pharaoh Apries, there was a civil war when Egypt was weakened, and then Babylon came to conquer Egypt and the entire Middle East. So the Father showed me that the drought in ancient Egypt took place when this Pharaoh, which is one of the last Pharaoh, was in charge, Pharaoh Apries. And he said, I'm going to set up a cruel master over the land of Egypt, which back then was Pharaoh Apries. And when I was reading this verse, he showed me this picture. He showed me this picture, and he spoke to me, and he asked me a question. And he told me, where is his father from? Exactly. His father is from Kenya, and the people of Kenya are related to the ancient Nubians. And the ancient Nubians is the civilization where the pharaohs came from. Yes. So during the time of ancient Pharaoh Apries, there was a drought in the Nile, and eventually a civil war broke. And as there was also economical judgment because he was betraying Israel. And Father showed me that since this last president took office, you know, the debt of the U.S. has been going from $10 trillion to $17 trillion, as the U.S. has been also betraying Israel. Now, I want to also share another prophetical aspect. The ancient Nile River, it went through 4 major cities in ancient Egypt. It went through Memphis, It went through Tebas. It went through Alexandria. It went through Alexandria. And also it went through Luxor, and it goes through the modern town of Cairo. Cairo is the modern capital of Egypt. Interestingly, the Mississippi River goes through Memphis, Tennessee, Luxor, Arkansas. The name Luxor comes from the word Luxor. It goes all the way to Tebas, Illinois, and to Cairo, Illinois. And on the delta of the Mississippi River, we have a town called Alexandria in the state of Louisiana, which is very interesting. Now, we also have another town called Alexandria in Minnesota, which is one of the sources of the Mississippi River. Very interesting. Now, the father spoke to me, and he showed me this last president. His father is from Kenya. This is the region where the ancient pharaohs came from, and also is the source of the Nile River. But Obama began his political career in the state of Illinois, that is one of the sources of the Mississippi River. Very interesting. Now, the next prophetical aspect that the father showed me, he showed me the date of the Exodus. This date was 1492 BC. During 1492 BC, there was a pharaoh whose name was Thutmose. Thutmose was the son of Ahmose. Ahmose in Hebrew means brother of Moses, Moshe. It's very interesting that when Moses was a little child, he was raised as an Egyptian prince, and he had a half brother whose name was Ahmose. Well, 40 years later, Moses fled Egypt because of the oppression of the Israelites, and he was standing for righteousness to defend Israel. So he needed to flee Egypt, and eventually Ahmose became the king of Egypt. Now, 40 years later, Ahmose died, and his son Thutmose was in charge. And that's when Father appeared to Moses and told him to go to Egypt and get the children of Israel out. Now, this date, according to modern archaeology, we can determine that Pharaoh Thutmose died in 1492 BC. Now, also archaeology proves this was the only pharaoh that had two wives, and his firstborn child with his first wife died on the same year, and his firstborn child with his second wife also died on the same year. How odd. Now, when we read the book of Exodus, it says that the spirit of the destroyer came to Egypt to destroy all the firstborn children. So, for a pharaoh like Thutmose, if you have one wife, you know, the firstborn, your firstborn child of your only wife would get killed by this spirit of the destroyer. But if you have two wives, that means that you have two firstborn children. You're going to have your firstborn with your first wife and your firstborn with your second wife. So interestingly, archaeology proves this was the only pharaoh that had two wives, and his firstborn children of his two wives died on that very year when he was killed. Interestingly, also the book of the Psalms tells us that Pharaoh sank into the ocean and he perished with his army. So the Tanakh tells us that this Pharaoh died in the same year that all the firstborn of Egypt died. Interestingly, with NASA technology available since 2006, I believe, we can see lunar eclipses throughout history for the last 3,000 years. And it is very interesting that in 1492 BC, this pharaoh dies with his firstborn children, and also there is a lunar eclipse at the very date of Passover, as the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt. Interestingly, in 1492 AD, again, that year we have lunar eclipses in Passover and Sukkot, this year and also the following year, 1493. And that's when the children of Israel came out of Spain. That was the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition. Again, with lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. So, in 1492 BC, there is another interesting aspect. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, commanded the children of Israel to make bricks without a straw. He brought economical judgment on them so that they couldn't even dream with redemption, as Moshe was trying to get them out of Egypt. So, to make bricks without a straw for the Hebrew people meant that instead of working maybe 10 or 12 hours a day, now you have to work 14 hours a day. You've got to look for the straw. So this happened in 1492 BC. Now, 3,500 years later, 3,500 years later, to the very date, we come to 2008. 3,500 years later, after this date, is 2008. In 2008, as Obama gets elected, the stock market crashed 777 points. In the last 3 months, his first 3 months in office, a lot of the NASDAQ and Dow Jones went down, and now we have this end of days Pharaoh again bringing economical judgment. As he was 3,500 years ago, so is in the modern days. Now, it is very interesting that the ancient Pharaoh, Aprius, going back to Isaiah 19, he betrays Israel. Egypt was meant to be a friend of Israel. America presumes to be a friend of Israel. Now, when Babylon was coming to fight against Israel, Pharaoh Aprius betrays Israel, and then Israel is defeated by Babylon. And because of this, Father proclaims a judgment in the book of Ezekiel, where it says that Pharaoh is a staff of reed to the house of Israel that breaks and splinters his hand. So because of this, Father brought economical judgment to ancient Egypt. Now, since Obama took office, he has been in the history of this country the most anti-Israel president in the history of this country. And it is very interesting that the same economical judgments that happened in ancient Egypt are happening now in modern America. So since he takes office, the U.S. debt was at $10 trillion around down here, and now it has been over 17. This is 2012. It's all now it's over $17 trillion. So the ancient Pharaoh Aprius saw that civil unrest was coming, and he brought mercenaries from Greece. He brought Greek soldiers to quench the Egyptian revolts and to bring stability to his country. And it is very interesting that since Obama took office, and they see that this debt is impossible to liquidate. No nation in history of humanity ever owed $17 trillion, which is about 25% of the world's money. So they know that a coming economical collapse is on the horizon, and there's going to be civil unrest. And in the last administration, they have been bringing foreign armies. There are many U.S. soldiers that have witnessed the presence of German troops and Chinese troops and Russian troops on U.S. soil. But why? The reason is that in case there is civil unrest, most likely American troops won't go against their fellow citizens, their fellow brothers. But foreign troops won't care about fellow citizens. So when I was giving this prophecy, this harbinger of Memphis and the ancient Memphis and all the parallels of 1492 BC and 1492 AD, Father spoke to me and told me that this event, the judgment on America and the judgment on the world, is going to happen in his calendar. We need to know his calendar. We need to know his prophetic clock. And his clock is contained in the sabbatical years. Let us go to Leviticus 25 briefly. So Leviticus 25:3, it says, 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruit. But in the 7th year shall be a Shabbat of rest to the land, Shabbat to Yahweh Shaddai. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. It says, that which grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, neither gather the grapes of your andres vine. It says, it shall be a year of rest for the land. And the Shabbat of the land will provide food for you and your servant, for your maid, and for your hired servant, and for the stranger who is within you, who sojourns with you. So, every 7 years, according to the book of Leviticus, is a shemitah. Shemitah in Hebrew means release. This is the year of release. Why the Father gave us the shemitah? Because the shemitah is a prototype of the Shabbat, the 1,000 years of Shabbat that we will have with Yeshua. When we go back to Genesis, the Father made the whole universe in 6 days, but He rested on the 7th. When we have this prophetic week, we have 6 days to work, but on the 7th is the Shabbat. We rest. In the same way, we have 6 months to work, but on the 7th month is very interesting because we have 3 main high feasts. We have the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and we have the Feast of Sukkot, Tabernacles. So the ancient Israelites, 3,000 years ago, they didn't have trains or highways or cars or any of that. So they would take the 7th month as a sabbatical month to do the yearly pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So they could keep the Feast of Trumpets, they could keep Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And during the Feast of Tabernacles, there was a Torah reading. So the priest would stand in the courts of the temple and they would read the Torah, and the Israelites will get their spiritual food, will get a spiritual nourishment to be able to keep going the rest of the year. In the same way, we have 6 years to work, but on the 7th year is a shemitah. So during the 7th year, we gotta let the land rest, you know. Many scientists actually prove that if you let the land rest on the 7th year, then you don't need to use all these chemical fertilizers, you know, because the land will recuperate. Now, the idea of the 7th year is this: if you had employees, they would work for you for 6 years, but on the 7th, you were meant to release them with their due payment, like the American version of the 401k. So they would go free with their due payment. And also, if you were the owner of a farmer, the owner of a farm, and you had like 1,000 apple trees, during the shemitah, you cannot tell the trees not to produce fruit. So the trees would produce fruit in the shemitah, but the difference is that during the shemitah, you wouldn't trade this fruit. So during the shemitah, you would eat the figs or apples that you need for you and your house, but the rest of the apples you would give for free to the pilgrim. So during this year, as the workers were released from their activities and they had their due payment and there was free food throughout the land of Israel, people didn't have the burden of taxes and and working very hard for food and all that. They had the full year for free and free food to go to Jerusalem and worship the Father. So that the entire year they could study Torah. They could have a close communication with the Father, and they could receive this spiritual nourishment. So historically, when ancient Israel kept the shemitah, Israel enjoyed a blessing, a great, great blessing. But when Israel failed to keep the shemitah, that's when the judgments came to Israel. So I put all the shemitahs in the right chronological order since Genesis, and we're going to find some of the most amazing events in history during this shemitah year. This shemitah is very important because it will help us to understand end of days prophecy, the future of America, the future of Israel, and the plan that the Father has for his remnant. So this is a timeline from Genesis. You can see Adam. He was born in the year 0. The Father made him in the year 0. And he lived 930 years. And he died. Eventually, when he was 130 years old, is when Seth was born. So Seth was born in the year 130, since the creation of Adam. And he died in the year 1042. The book of Genesis gives us all the genealogy, all the way to Abraham. So the first remarkable shemitah is going to be this year, 987. Enoch, or Hanoch in Hebrew, he ascended to heaven when he was 365 years old, according to the book of Genesis. And he was born in the year 622. So 622 plus 365 is 987. 987 is a shemitah. I'm going to show you very briefly here in the calculator. The year 7 is the first shemitah, right? So from Adam gets leaves the Garden of Eden. So the first shemitah is the year 7. Now the next shemitah is the year 14, right? The next shemitah is the year 21, 28. Just put attention to the calculator, 35. So if we keep going in this unbroken chain of sevens, (987). The year 987 is the shemitah, is the 141st shemitah, and that's when Enoch ascended to heaven. Very interesting. Enoch is the seventh from Adam. He's the seventh generation, and he ascended to heaven as a prophetic picture that in the end of days, during the 7th millennium, the bride of Yeshua will ascend to heaven. It is a very beautiful prophetic picture. And this ascension is during a shemitah year. Very fascinating. Now, going down the line, we have the birth of King David. King David was born in the year 2884, and he lived 70 years and died. The year 2884 is a shemitah. He lived 70 years, which is 10 shemitahs, and then he died. Eventually, we're going to find a really interesting episode in the history of Israel. According to 2 Kings 18:9, during the time when the king Hezekiah, when he was alive in about in his 14th year is when Sennacherib came to destroy many of the cities of Judah. I'm gonna actually go down here. 2 Kings 18:3. the most powerful empire in the world, destroyed many cities in Israel and Judah. And he threatened the king of Israel that there was no salvation in his Elohim, in the Almighty. So that very year is when the prophet Isaiah went to prophesy to the king and told him that this event was not going to happen. And the sign that Isaiah gave him, he says, this year you're going to eat what it grows by itself, and the next year what springs from the ground, and in the third year you're gonna sow and reap, and you're gonna plant vineyards. It's very interesting because this sign is the very same sign of the shemitah. The sign of the shemitah is that on the 6th year, since on the 7th we cannot work the land, on the 6th year we're going to have a blessing, and the blessing is going to be reflected in our crops. We're going to have enough crops for the 6th year, the 7th, the 8th, and on the 9th year we begin again with the regular agricultural cycle. So this year, when the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, came to destroy many of the cities of Israel, is 708 BC, which is exactly the shemitah following the destruction of Israel. The tribes of Israel were exiled to Persia by the Assyrian Empire on 715 BC, which was a shemitah. And the reason was their disobedience. The nation turned to idolatry and apostasy. And 7 years later, Sennacherib came to destroy many of the cities of Judah. Now, if you look at this year, 708 BC, if you want to figure out the next shemitah, it's going to be 701 BC. I'm going to put it here in the calculator. So we have the next shemitah is 701, 694 BC. If we keep this unbroken chain of sevens, we're going to be able to translate the shemitah to the modern calendar. And I'm going to do this. The year 69 is in shemitah. 69 is when the Romans were setting Jerusalem on fire. Very interesting. I went one ahead, 328. The following, the shemitah before 328 was 321. During the year 321 is when Emperor Constantine issued the Sunday laws. It was forbidden to worship on the Sabbath. Now you needed to worship on the Sunday. It was forbidden to keep Passover and Sukkot. Now you gotta keep Easter and December 25th and
Christmas.
Well, back then they didn't call it Christmas, but they called it the cult of the dead. They worship the dead on December 25th, and they were drinking till they would fall on the ground, and we see the same spirit in the modern world. And on January 1st, they would follow with the same celebration. So Constantine changed the Sunday laws, and as we keep going in this unbroken chain of sevens, we're going to come to modern history, 1812, when Napoleon was invading Russia. Very interesting during the Napoleonic War. So I'm going to open up a little graph here, so you're going to see the shemitahs. Also, Jerusalem was destroyed in the shemitah. In the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is talking to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel released the captives when Babylon was coming to destroy the temple, but then he changed his mind and put them back to work. You remember the story in Jeremiah? And Jeremiah the prophet goes to the king Zedekiah and says, well, because you didn't release the captives during the shemitah, now you're going to be released to die by the sword, the pestilence, and the famine. And Israel went into captivity for 70 years, which is 10 shemitahs. So 1315 was the shemitah. There was a great European famine. 1350, the Black Plague in Europe. That was the beginning of the Black Plague in Europe. As they were persecuting thousands of Jews in Europe, the Black Plague came to exterminate about 35% of the population. Now, 1700 is the beginning of the 1700s, is the shemitah. That's the beginning of the great European war, the Northern War in Europe between United Kingdom, France, also Germany was involved. And this great Northern War ended in 1721, which was another shemitah. After this year is when the first, many of the first pilgrims began to immigrate in masses to America, because Europe was devastated with the end of the Great European War. Now by 1714, we have war between Turkey and Venice, the Ottoman-Venetian War in 1714. In 1756, this is a shemitah, and that's the beginning of the 7-Year War, a very famous war that devastated most of Europe. We have 1791, another shemitah. There were lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot, and that's when the U.S. was established as a federation, and they began building Washington, D.C. 7 years later, the next shemitah is the French Revolution. 14 years later, which is 2 shemitahs later, is the Napoleonic War, invasion of Russia. 2 shemitahs later, 1826, we have war between Russia and Iran. The following shemitah is the Spanish Civil War. Then we have 3 shemitahs later, we have 1861, which is the American Civil War. Then 3 shemitahs later, we have 1896, which is the revolution in Philippines. 2 shemitahs later, we have 1910 Mexican Revolution. And the following shemitah, 1917. So 1917 is the shemitah. Somebody remembers what happened in 1917?
Balfour Decree.
Yeah. So in the middle of a First World War, the British conquered Israel after 12 centuries of Muslim occupation. And for the first time in almost 2,000 years under the Balfour Declaration, the Jewish people can come back to the land. And this is a sign of the end of days, because Yeshua told us the parable of the fig trees. When we see the fig tree blossoming, that means summer is near. That means the end is near. So the fig tree is a picture of Israel. So it's very interesting when General Allenby entering in Jerusalem, there was a lunar eclipse on December 28 in the Middle East. So this is very remarkable. About the same time General Allenby was redeemed in Jerusalem. Now the next shemitah, 1924, there's a revolution in Russia. Also, I didn't mention that in 1917, it was the beginning of the Russian Revolution, where they overthrew the Tsars, and there was great persecution. Now the next shemitah, 1931. 1931 is the year when the Empire State Building was finished as a symbol of pride and prosperity. And during this very year, it's interesting, there was economical recession, not just in the United States, but worldwide. There were many natural disasters in New Zealand. England invaded India. Japan invaded China. That's the year when the Soviet Chinese Republic began. The communists took over in China, and what they did is they began to oppress the Christians. Now, as a result of this terrible persecution, judgment came on China, and 4 or 5 million people died because of the Chinese bloods. In the very same year, that they decide to kill and persecute believers in China, especially Christians. There were the famous Chinese floods, and 23 million people lost their houses because of these floods. 7 years later, there was again a Spanish Civil War, very interesting, and that's the beginning of the Jewish persecution in Germany. During 1938, in the winter of 1938, the Germans got the bricks, and they slammed the bricks against the windows of Jewish businesses and broke all the glasses. And this night is known as the Night of the Crystals. Everybody remembers the Night of the Crystals? 1938. So they began persecuting the Jewish people and putting many in concentration camps. Now, 7 years later, what Genesis says, if you bless Abraham, I will bless you, but if you curse Abraham, I will curse you. And Germany, rose in pride against the Jewish people. And 7 years later, in 1945, Germany was completely destroyed. Every German city was bombed by the Allies, by United Kingdom, France, and United States. That was the famous bombing of Berlin, 1945. We also see the nuclear bombing on Japan in 1945. It was the end of the Second World War, and there were three major institutions created in 1945 that were intended to bring globalized unitarian world, which were the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank. Three major institutions that, in the end of days, the Antichrist will use to bring a one world order. A one world. 7 years later, we have many natural disasters in England. There were nuclear detonations in Nevada, and that's the beginning of the European community. After the terrible devastation of Second World War, now the protocols for European Union come in 1952. And this is a prophetic fulfillment of the resurrection of the Roman Empire. Now, 7 years later is the revolution in Cuba. Vietnam invaded Laos. Tibet was invaded by China. And that's the beginning of the spatial race. We begin to send satellites and people into outer space. And it's very interesting this year because Daniel prophesied that during the end of days, knowledge was going to increase. So the satellites have to do with internet and telecommunications and all that. Also, there was war in Spain and the country Basque. There was the famous Chinese famine where 15 million people died. And there was a terrible typhoon killing many thousands, 5,000 people in Japan, and 1.5 million were left homeless. So the shemitahs, I'm going to do a brief stop. The shemitahs are years of visitation. And shemitah means release. If we're doing the commandments of the Father, we're going to be released from the burdens of the world to be able to worship Him in Jerusalem. But if we don't keep the shemitah, the judgment is going to be released on us. We're going to be released to free fall. So that's why throughout history, most of the major events and economical collapses happened during the Hebrew year Shemitah. And if we just keep this calendar and follow this unbroken chain of sevens, we already saw in ancient Israel what happened. The 10 were exiled to Persia during the Shemitah. The king Hezekiah was facing the king of Syria, and the king of Syria destroyed many of the cities of Israel on the Shemitah. King David was born on the Shemitah, and he died on the Shemitah. The Exodus happened on a Shemitah, and then we see Enoch ascending to heaven on the Shemitah. Now the next Shemitah was 1966, when we see the many natural disasters in Finland, big floods. That was the Vietnam War. There were some racial wars in the United States. It was also a key moment in the Cold War, a lot of tension. There was martial law in Argentina. France begins to detonate the first nuclear bombs in the Pacific. There was a revolution in China, several quakes in Turkey, and that was the war between Israel and Syria. Also during this year, we see the beginning of the construction of the World Trade Center in New York, 1966. By 1973, we have the Yom Kippur War. We have the opening of the first tower in the World Trade Center, and there is big economical crisis worldwide. Now, 73 was a very key year when President Nixon was in office. President Nixon was putting a lot of pressure on Israel to give the land away. Now, the prophet Joel says that I'm going to judge the nations that divide my land. The land of Israel belongs to the Father, and he will give it to whomever he wishes. So he told us in the book of Joel that he's going to judge the nations that divide his land. So nobody can divide his land. So in 1973, when President Nixon was putting so much pressure on Israel to divide the land so that the U.S. could buy cheap oil from the Arab nations, interestingly, United States was hit with the oil embargo. There was a big oil crisis, oil embargo. There was economical recession, and also that was the year of the Yom Kippur War in Israel. Very interesting year. Now, 7 years later, United States follows the same pattern with Jimmy Carter, and President Carter, he was a very close friend to the King of Saudi Arabia, and the King of Saudi Arabia hated Israel with a passion, and most of the decisions he took were completely against Israel, and again, he was putting great pressure on Israel to divide the land, to make peace with the Palestinians, so that the U.S. could buy cheap oil from the Arab world. Now, let us remember that the state of Israel is the size of Delaware, about the state of Delaware. And all the Muslim nations in the Middle East, they are the size of Canada and United States and Mexico together. And they are saying that if Israel gives land away, there will be peace. How is it possible that Israel, a tiny nation, the size of the state of Delaware, will give more land to an empire, to a radical empire that is the size of Canada, United States, and Mexico together? So 1980, again, President Jimmy Carter was putting great pressure on Israel to divide the land and to make painful concessions. And during the spring of 1980, there was a big crash in Wall Street. The price of gold and silver just collapsed. There was big oil crisis, economical crisis worldwide. Also during that year, there was the eruption of the volcano St. Helens in Washington State. There was a heat wave, historical summer 1980, also a very cold winter. And that was the beginning of the war between Iraq and Iran. Now, 7 years later, we see the same pattern with President Reagan. President Reagan was putting pressure on Israel to divide the land so that the U.S. could strengthen diplomatic ties with the U.S. And during the fall of 1980, he was forcing Israel to make very painful concessions, to give about 30% of its territory. Interestingly, during the fall of 1987, the Dow Jones goes down 500 points. That was the biggest crash in history since the Great Depression. The stock market lost about 22% of its value. I don't know if anybody remembers the crash of 87 and the big recession. Now, 7 years later, the next shemitah, 1994, that was a very interesting year with President Clinton. He had a very famous meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, and he forced Israel to make peace with the King of Jordan. And Israel needed, because of this peace treaty, Israel now needs to give away millions of cubic meters of water from Lake Galilee to Jordan, and Israel has almost no water. All of Israel has less water, I think. I think it has about 5 times less water than the state of Arkansas, the nation of Israel, or even less. And now they are forcing Israel to give this water to Jordan. Now, eventually, Clinton had a second meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel and Arafat. And during that meeting, Israel again was going to compromise about 30% of its territory. And Israel needed an urgent miracle. And during that meeting, when the history of Israel was going to be decided, and Israel needed to give about 35% of its territory or finish warm diplomatic relations with the United States. President Clinton has received a phone call, and somebody asked him, who is Monica Lewinsky? So at that very moment, Clinton was disgraced before the entire nation, and now he needed to work on cleaning his name, and he needed to drop the case of Israel. So from that moment on, he needed to put more emphasis in cleaning up his name. So Israel was saved by the grace of the Father. So judgment came to the United States on the spring of 1994. Most of the NASDAQ was wiped out. It went down many points. There was a big quake in Los Angeles, about 35 billion in damages. You guys remember the famous quake of Los Angeles, 1994. Also, there was a storm, Alberto, that destroyed about 18,000 homes in the U.S. Then came Hurricane Gordon, a very devastating hurricane. And during Palm Sunday, Passover, during the beginning of Passover 1994, there was a big tornado outbreak in the southeast of the United States. Also that year, there was an historical winter. It was very, very cold. Now, 7 years later, we have the next shemitah. During September 2001, President Bush was having a series of conferences about dividing Israel and creating a Palestinian state. And Israel had a deadline and needed to take a decision by the end of 2001. Within a week later, about a week later, the World Trade Center came down. 2 planes hit the World Trade Center just within a week, and that was the beginning of the war in Afghanistan. Now, from this moment on, is very interesting what we're going to see in the next Shemitahs, because in 2001, we have the prophecy of the first harbinger of Isaiah 9:10. The harbinger of Isaiah 9:10, I think most of you probably saw the book The Harbinger by Jonathan Cahn. So in 2001, when the Twin Towers collapsed, we saw 2 senators that testified before the Congress the prophecy of Isaiah 9:10 that says the bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones. Very interesting. When ancient Israel was destroyed, about 14 years before it was destroyed in 729 BC, it had a visitation. Actually an invasion by the king of Assyria that came and destroyed most of the cities of Israel. And Israel, in defiance, instead of seeking the Father with fasting and prayer, Israel proclaimed, the bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones. Now, this harbingers is very interesting. because ancient Israel, 14 years later, which is 2 Shemitahs later, it was completely destroyed. The Assyrian army came, Israel didn't repent, and Israel was completely destroyed. Now, when the Twin Towers fell, the United States began to build a higher tower, which is the Freedom Tower. And here we see the foundation stone of the Freedom Tower. This is a hewn stone. So, when the Twin Towers fell, the senators testified the bricks have fallen, but we're going to build with hewn stone. A hewn stone in Hebrew is called a gassit. A gassit is a stone that can be 1,000 pounds heavy, or 3,000 or 10,000. So this is the foundation stone of the World Trade Center. And it is very interesting that as one of the towers was collapsing, there was a piece of metal that fell on a sycamore tree on Ground Zero and destroyed the sycamore tree. And now we see a ceremony where they are replacing this sycamore tree with a cedar tree that is a greater tree. Now, when Jonathan Kahn wrote this book, The Harbinger, I've been in connection with him for the last year and a half. And I wrote him a letter and shared with him that 14 years after ancient Israel made the proclamation, the bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones, ancient Israel was completely wiped out. Now, 14 years from 9/11, since United States made this proclamation, instead of seeking the Father with repentance, with fasting and prayer, 14 years later is going to be 2015. Now, in 2015 is a very interesting year because it's not just a Shemitah year, but it's also a year where we're going to have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. And we're going to have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot beginning in 2014. So this means that we're going to have a tetrad, 4 blood moons, 4 lunar eclipses in a straight line. Now, during this year, 2001, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets, that is historically when the nation is meant to have the bills clear before the Father. That's when the judgment comes. That's when we blow the trumpet. On the eves of Feast of Trumpet 2001, we see a stock market crashed in this month. The Dow Jones went down 650 points. Now, 7 years later, when they finished the foundation of the Freedom Tower in 2008, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets, which is 24 hours before Feast of Trumpets, that is a high Shabbat, is represented by the number 7, is the 7th month, represented by the number 7, and it's a Shemitah, which is the 7th year. The stock market crashes 777 points. Now, in 2015, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets 2015, we are going to have a solar eclipse. Very interesting. We won't have just lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, but we're going to have a solar eclipse on that very day, which is a symbol of judgment. Now, I already showed you what happened throughout history in the Shemitah years. Now, let us go to Book of Acts chapter 2, verses 20. So the Book of Acts, verses 20 to 20, is talking about the end of days. Somebody wants to read Acts 2:20?
The sun will become dark and the moon blood before the great and beautiful day of Jehovah promised.
Hallelujah. So, throughout the prophecies, not just in the book of Acts, but also in the book of Joel and in the book of Revelation, it talks about the sun becoming dark and the moon turning to blood. Now, a dark sun And a blood moon is an Hebraic grammatical form to describe a total lunar eclipse and also a total solar eclipse. When we have a total lunar eclipse, I'm going to show you here, the moon stops receiving sunlight, so the moon turns orange, red. So when we have a total lunar eclipse, the moon looks like this, and when we have a total solar eclipse, the sun looks dark. Now, we have solar eclipses and lunar eclipses every single year in some parts of the planet. But what is so significant of this prophecy is that historically, whenever we have solar and lunar eclipses on key Hebrew dates, amazing prophetical events have happened in the history of humanity. I'm going to show you an example in the book of Amos, chapter 8. So the book of Amos chapter 8 talks about judgment on Jerusalem. When we go to verses 3, Amos 8:3, it says, "And the sons of the temple shall turn to lamentation in that day, says the Almighty El Shaddai. Dead bodies shall be many in everywhere. They shall be thrown down in any place." Silence. Now in Amos 8:9, it says, "And it shall come to pass in that day, says the King, El Shaddai, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. And I shall turn your festivals into mourning, and all your songs into lamentation." So this prophecy is very interesting because it talks about our feast celebrations being turned into lamentation. The two main feasts in the history of Israel, according to Torah, do you know which are the two most important celebrations in the Torah? Yes?
Passover and Yom Kippur?
Passover and Sukkot. Passover and Sukkot are the two most important celebrations for the nation of Israel. Now, during Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the 15th of the first month. That's the first High Shabbat. And the Feast of Tabernacles begins on the 15th of the seventh month. And it's for 7 days. So one is on the 15th of the first month, the other is on the 15th of the seventh month. Now, anybody knows what happens to the moon on the 15th of the first month and on the 15th of the seventh month? It's a full moon, yes. So the moon, we see the beginning of the calendar, the first day of the first month with the first crescent of the moon, right after the new moon. And 15 days later, we have, 14 years later, we have the full moon. So during Passover and Sukkot, the two most important dates and celebrations for the nation of Israel, when we have a full, beautiful, full, bright moon, instead of having a bright moon, we have this. On Passover, one of the most sacred days for Israel, and on the first High Shabbat of Sukkot, instead of having this full bright moon, we see this blood moon. What does that mean to you? What do you think that means? It's a prophetic sign. It's a prophetic sign of judgment. So I'm going to show you in the calendar, historically, blood moons, lunar eclipses throughout history. We have three types of years. We have years where we see lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. Then we have years that are called a tetrad, where we have 4 lunar eclipses on a straight line for 2 straight years on Passover and Sukkot, 1 year, and the next year, again, lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. And historical, fascinating events have happened. Then we have another interesting event when we have a tetrad, 4 blood moons in a straight line, and in the last year of the blood moons, we have solar eclipses. Solar eclipses on the eve of the Hebrew New Year, on the eve of the first day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar. And also, we have solar eclipses on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. So whenever we have just 2 eclipses, there has been amazing wars and fascinating events throughout history. I'm going to show you now. But whenever we have a tetrad, 4 blood moons in a straight line, there has been an exodus. In 1492 BC, beginning in 1493 BC and 1492 BC, we have 4 blood moons in a straight line. In 1492 BC, we have a blood moon, a lunar eclipse on Passover, and the children of Israel came out of Egypt. In 1492 AD, again we have blood moons in Passover and Sukkot, and also in 1493 AD, and the children of Israel came out of Spain. Now, it is very interesting that Joseph was born in about 1775 BC. Now, when he was 39 years old, is when his brothers came to him. When he was 30 years old, he became the governor of Egypt. But when he was 39 years old, his brothers came to him. From that moment all the way till the Exodus, we have 240 years. Now, the children of Israel sojourned in a land that was not theirs for 430 years. This count begins with Isaac. Before Isaac was born, Abraham received a prophecy that his children were going to be foreigners in a land not theirs. Right? And their enemies were going to oppress them. But in the 4th generation, they were going to come out. Now, when Isaac was born, Abraham was sojourning in the land of Hebron and also in the land of Beersheba. Anybody knows where is Hebron and Beersheba? Where?
North of Israel.
South of Israel.
South of
So
Israel.
Hebron and Beersheba is modern south of Israel. But 4,000 years ago, Hebron and Beersheba was called the land of Canaan, or Canaan, and it was ruled by the Egyptian Empire. Alaska, if somebody was born in Alaska 160 years ago, Alaska was part of Russia. If somebody was born in Texas 160 years ago, it was a Mexican. Or if somebody was born in California in the beginning of the 1800s, it was a Mexican. Now, the same thing, south of Israel, back then was part of the Egyptian Empire. So Abraham, by sojourning in the land of Hebron and Beersheba, he was sojourning in the land of Egypt. And actually, in south of Israel and most of Israel, we have found Egyptian inscriptions and statues of pharaohs, when the ancient pharaohs used to rule part of Israel. Now, from the time that Joseph was 39 years old all the way to the Exodus, we have 240 years. How do we know this information? Because Isaac was born, Jacob was born when Isaac was 60 years old, according to the book of Genesis. And then, when in Genesis 47, when Jacob went down to Egypt, he was 130 years old. See, from 430 years, we subtract 60 years of Isaac sojourning in Egypt, and Jacob 130, also sojourning in the land of Canaan, that was part of the Egyptian Empire. We have only 240 years left. But also, how do we know that this is true? When the brothers of Joseph went down to Egypt, Levi was one of the brothers of Joseph, right? Levi. Now, Levi had a son called Kehat, and then from the line of Kehat comes Amram, and from Amram it comes Moses, right? Just 3 generations. It's impossible that 3 generations give you 430 years. So the count begins with the birth of Isaac. Abraham was given that promise that his children were going to be sojourners in a land not theirs. Now, why is this number so remarkable and so important? When Joseph was 39 years old, his brothers came to him down to Egypt. 240 years later, they came out of Egypt. When the 10 tribes were exiled by the Assyrian Empire, 240 years later, they came, a big remnant of the 10 tribes, they came out of Persia with Ezra and Nehemiah. There were many of the 10 tribes in there. Now, Joseph was born in about 1775 BC. When he was 39 years old, 240 years later, they came out of Egypt. It's very interesting that in 1775 AD is the beginning of the independence movement in the United States with the Tea Party up in Boston, Massachusetts. And the next year we have the big independence war. And many pilgrims began to come to America. Now, 240 years later is going to be 2015. And in 2015 we have a tetrad, lunar eclipses in 2015 and 2014. So we see Israel, after spending 240 years in Egypt, leaves Egypt, then spends 240 years in Persia and leaves Persia. Now Israel is spending 240 years in America. And also, every time there was a tetrad, there was an exodus. We had 4 blood moons, 1492 BC, exodus of Egypt. 4 blood moons in 1492 AD, exodus out of Spain. And now we have the same blood moons in 2014 and 15. And this is a prophetic sign of the end of days exodus. The Father will position us in the places where we're meant to be for the end of days. So I'm going to tell you briefly, historically, throughout history, which years we saw blood moons, lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, and what happened. The first interesting year is the year 33. Anybody remembers what happened on the year 33? Yeshua, yeah.
Yeah, sure did.
Yeshua was crucified. On this year, we have blood moons, lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. There was a blood moon 2 hours after Yeshua was crucified. Now, a group of scientists and geologists, they went to Israel, and they studied the layers of dirt in the Dead Sea. And they found out that there was a seismic activity in Jerusalem on the year 33 AD, and there was a 7.8 earthquake in Jerusalem. Interestingly, when we read the New Testament, we find that when Yeshua was crucified, there was an earthquake and the graves opened. Also that year, we see the blood moons on Passover and Sukkot. In the year 69 AD, again, lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, the Romans set on fire Jerusalem. On the year 321, that year was not just a shemitah, but it also had blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. And that's when the Emperor Constantine issued the Sunday laws, and it was forbidden to worship on the Sabbath. Now you needed to worship on the Sunday. He changed the law. In the year 795, again blood moons during Passover and Sukkot, and that was the expansion of the empire of Charlemagne in Europe. There were bloody wars in Europe. In 767, we see the blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. That's when the empire was promised to Charlemagne. And it is interesting that this date is 1200 years before 1967. And on 1967, again, there are lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. And that's when, after the Six-Day War, Israel recaptured Jerusalem. 2,000 years later, since the Romans conquered Jerusalem, 2,000 years later, Jerusalem is again a Jewish city. On 1967, with the eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. We also have the year 1353, blood moons during Passover and Sukkot, and this was a key moment of the Black Plague in Europe. The Black Plague by 1353 reached all the way to Russia, Norway, Portugal, south of Italy, and exterminated about 35% of the population, as Europe was persecuting the Jewish people. Then we have in 843, we had blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. And that's when the empire of Charlemagne was divided amongst his three sons, and there were big wars in Europe. In 814, again, blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. That's when Charlemagne died. And it is very interesting that 1200 years later, we're going to have the same tetrad blood moons in Passover and Sukkot beginning in 2014. Very symbolic. 1121, blood moons during the feast. The Jewish people are expelled from Belgium. 1204, again, blood moons on the Hebrew feast. That's the fall of Constantinople. This was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Now we have 1251, lunar eclipses during the feast. That's when 800,000 crusaders were defeated by the Egyptian army. The crusaders lost most of the power. 1269, again, blood moons during the feast. And that's the beginning of Jewish persecution in France. Very interesting. 1298, we have blood moons during the feast. That's the beginning of Jewish persecution in Germany. 5,000 Jews are killed. Then we have blood moons in 1399, and that was the last outbreak of the Black Plague in Europe. So in 2014 and 15, especially in 2015, is very interesting because it's not just a year with blood moons, but it's also a tetrad. And also we will have solar eclipses on the eve of Feast of Trumpets and the eve of the Hebrew New Year. So when, the Father showed me that in 2015 we're going to see the geometric combination of a shemitah with the blood moons. There's going to be judgment worldwide, and this is going to be the beginning of the tribulation. But he showed me something else, and he guided me to the next prophecy. And the next prophecy is the year of visitation. Let us go to Isaiah 23:17. Isaiah 23:17, it says, "And it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that Yahweh Shaddai will visit Tyrus. And she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. And all her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to El Shaddai." So ancient Tyrus It was the financial capital of the Middle East 26 centuries ago. And ancient Titus received a warning 70 years before it was destroyed, and 70 years later it was completely wiped out. 70 is the year of visitation. The children of Israel went into exile for 70 years. After 70 years they came back. King David lived 70 years. Solomon lived 70 years. In the last year of Solomon there was a visitation. Daniel talks about the 70 weeks. It's very interesting. And here we see a pattern of judgment and visitation of 70 years. So when I was reading this verse, the Father showed me that in 2001, during the shemitah of 2001, it was not an ordinary shemitah, but it was a year of visitation. The years of visitation come with extra judgment and prophetic warning. So in 2001, the Twin Towers collapsed and the dollar began to devalue 25% every single year. The global economy began to go down, and it was the worst terrorist attack in modern history to the United States. So this was a visitation, a warning for the nation to repent and wake up before destruction or a way bigger visitation. So the visitations are warnings. Now, what happens 70 years before 9/11? Anybody remembers 70 years before 9/11? 1931. 1931, when America finished building the Empire State as a symbol of pride and prosperity, America is hit with a terrible depression and there is a recession worldwide. So 70 years before 9/11, on 1931, we see another visitation with the Great Depression. Also, the famous dust bowls. You know, many farms in the United States were covered with dust. There was a great famine. Now, 70 years before 1931, we have another year of visitation, which is 1861. Anybody remembers what happened in 1861? American Civil War. So we have another visitation with economic recession. 70 years before 1861, we have the year 1791. 1791, there was the French Revolution, so economical judgment worldwide, and that's when United States was established as a federation, and that was the year when they laid the foundation of Washington, D.C. 1791. 70 years later, 70 years before is 1721. 1721 was the end of the Great European War. Europe was devastated, and that's when many pilgrims began coming to America as a result of the devastation in Europe. So we see another visitation. If we keep going down in the past, in these cycles of 70s, we get to the year 321, when Constantine invented the Vatican and began to persecute the Jewish people and the Christians. And eventually we get to the year 181. 181 was the year of Roman Caesar, Marcus Aurelius. If you saw the movie The Gladiator, you guys remember this movie? When this Caesar wants to be a good guy and wants to start a republic, but his son is very wicked and kills him. And then his son is defeated by the gladiator. So that event, when Marcus Aurelius was killed and there was a revolution in Rome, that was the year 181. It was another year of visitation. So it's very interesting. Now, when the Father showed me the pattern of the 70 years, he showed me that in Jeremiah, it prophesies about the fall of Babylon, and it says, after 70 years, I'm going to punish the king of Babylon. Jeremiah 25. Now, ancient Babylon, when ancient Babylon destroyed Israel and became a world empire, 70 years later, ancient Babylon was destroyed, the king of Babylon was killed, and now Persia became the world empire. Babylon rose to power for 70 years. So when I read this prophecy, Father guided me to Jeremiah 50. Let us go to Jeremiah 50. So let us see what happens to Babylon. If you guys can write down Jeremiah 50 and 51, write it down and study carefully these two chapters at home. I'm going to just tell you a summary, a few verses, because we don't want to make this study too long. Many need to go home, so we want to be short. But Jeremiah 50 and 51 talk about the destruction of Babylon. So you can study this at home. Jeremiah 50 verses 3, it says, "For out of the north comes up a nation against her, and shall make her land desolate." Jeremiah 58, it says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon and come out of the land of the Chaldeans and be as rams before the flocks." Jeremiah 50:38, it says, "A drought is upon her waters." So study at home Jeremiah 50 and 51 because these are very long. I'm just going to give you a few verses. Now, Jeremiah 51:6, it says, "Flee out of the midst of Babylon and let every man save his life." 51:7, "Babylon has been a golden cup in the hands of the Almighty, which made all the earth drunken." Jeremiah 51:8, "Babylon shall suddenly fall and be destroyed. Lament for her, take balm for her pain, if so be that she may be healed." Babylon 51:13, "O you who dwell upon many waters, abundant in treasures, your end has come, the measure of your greedy gain." Now, let us go to Revelation 18, that also talks about the fall of Babylon. Also study Revelation 17 and 18 at home. Our time here is brief, so I'm just going to give you a summary of a few verses. So the book of Revelation also complements the prophecy of Jeremiah and talks about the destruction of the end of days Babylon. And in Jeremiah 17:5, it describes Babylon as the head of this great city, the head of this nation, that is called the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth. In Revelation 18:2, it says, "Babylon the Great is falling." In Revelation 18:4, it says, "Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins." Revelation 18:7, "As much as she glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her, because she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I will never lament. Therefore her plague shall come to her in one day, death and mourning and famine." So when I was reading this harbinger of ancient Babylon rose to world power for 70 years and then collapsed. Now the book of Revelation talks about an end of days Babylon. When the book of Revelation was written, that was about 6 centuries after the fall of ancient Babylon. So of course Revelation talks about a different Babylon, an end of days Babylon, that will be the most powerful nation in the world. And its capital is this great city called Babylon, that is the great city by the waters, that is the financial capital of the world, and that's where the nations meet.
New York City.
So when I read this prophecy, the Father guided me to this picture. According to prophecy, Babylon is the richest city in the world. New York, far beyond Chicago and Los Angeles and Paris and London, is the richest city in the world. It has a big concentration of Jewish people. That's why it says, "Come out of here, my people." His people are the children of Israel. New York has the biggest concentration of Jewish people in the world. Revelation 17 describes New York as a great harlot by the waters. we see the Statue of Liberty. It is framed according to a pattern of an ancient Babylonian female idol that was called the Great Harlot, and the Babylonians worshipped this woman and committed horrible abominations inside the temple dedicated to this woman, and put a crown on this woman of 7 spikes. It says in the prophecies that of Jeremiah, Babylon was a golden cup in the hands of the Almighty. We see New York with a golden torch. It says that Babylon is where the nations meet. The United Nations headquarters are in New York City. Now, there is something very interesting about New York. That New York is the only great city in the world that actually has a town, a little city inside New York called Babylon. For those that have never been in New York, you can just go to Google Maps and you can see this town, Babylon, just about 15 minutes drive from Manhattan. Now the prophecies talk about the destruction of this place, and the Father is commanding his people to come out of Babylon. Now, ancient Babylon, again, it follows the pattern of visitation of 70 years. It rose to world power for 70 years, and after 70 years, it was destroyed. It is very interesting that United States rose to world power in 1945 when United States won the Second World War. The dollar became the most powerful currency in the world. 70 years later, it's going to be the 7th year of Obama, and it's going to be a shemitah, and it's going to be a year with blood moons and Passover and Sukkot. And most economists predict that the dollar is going to be completely destroyed in 2015. And interestingly, Russia and China will have a bigger economy and a bigger army by 2015. It's very interesting how all the harbingers are coming together. Now, let's go to a prophecy in Jeremiah 25. Jeremiah 25, it talks about the fall of Babylon. Babylon was destroyed 70 years later. Now in Jeremiah 25:11, sorry, 25:12, it says, "And it shall come to pass, when the 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon." Now, Isaiah 13, let us go briefly to Isaiah 13. It's going to tell us when this king of Babylon died. Study at home Isaiah 13. It says the doom concerning Babylon. Isaiah 13:9, it says, "Behold, the day of Adonai comes, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations shall not give their light, the sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not send out its light to shine." It is very interesting. When is the sun dark? When a solar eclipse. Now, the moon is not given its light in two instances. When it's the conjunction of the moon, which is about the season of the new moon, and also when there is lunar eclipse. Now, the king of Babylon was killed on a year that there was a solar eclipse at the conjunction of the moon. And that was the 7th month. Interestingly, in 2015 is going to be the 7th year of Obama, and we're going to see a solar eclipse at the conjunction of the moon, which is the eve of Feast of Trumpets 2015. Now it says, after 70 years, I'm going to punish the king of Babylon. Well, let us try to see the beginning, the past, in order to determine the future. 70 years before 2015 is 1945, the nuclear bombing of Japan, end of Second World War, the release of the Jewish captives from the concentration camps. But something happened to the president of this nation. President Franklin Roosevelt was a great friend with the king of Saudi Arabia, and the king of Saudi Arabia told him, we're going to trade in oil and make great businesses with the oil, but I ask you a favor. You are not going to allow the nation of Israel to exist. Franklin Roosevelt agreed to this deadly covenant. Within about a week, he died in his office. In the spring of 1945, he had a brain hemorrhage, and he died in his office. The next president that took office right away signed the papers and endorsed Israel to become a nation. It's very interesting. 70 years before this date, 1945, when President Franklin Roosevelt died, is 1875. During 1875, former President Andrew Johnson also died. And he's the president that took over when Lincoln was killed. It's very interesting. So we have a dead president, the king of Babylon, the most powerful nation on earth, there on the shemitah of 1875. 70 years later, Franklin Roosevelt, towards the end of Second World War, dies. 70 years later is going to be the 7th year of Obama, with blood moons in Passover and Sukkot, with a tetrad, with 240 years of the children of Israel dwelling in this nation since the beginning of the independence movement. And it's going to be 70 years since Second World War. Pretty interesting. Now let us go to Ezekiel very briefly. Ezekiel 32, it talks about the judgment on Pharaoh. You can read at home in Ezekiel 32. Ezekiel 32:7 it says, and when I will have extinguished you, talking about Pharaoh, I shall cover the heavens and make the stars dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. The same pattern when ancient Pharaoh priest was killed, it was a cloudy day, and it is very interesting that for Feast of Trumpets in Israel, it is usually a cloudy day. You know why? Because that's the first day of fall. You switch from summer to fall. And of the 5 years that I spent in Israel when I was trying to witness the new moon for Feast of Trumpets, curiously, that day was always cloudy. Now, the ancient Pharaoh priest that betrayed Israel, also died when there was a solar eclipse on the 7th month at the conjunction of the moon. The same astronomical pattern is coming by the 7th year of Obama, with the tetrad. Every time there was a tetrad, there has been an exodus. Now, let us go to the last stage of this prophetic seminar. Why the prophecies talk about the escape from Babylon and the destruction of this nation, and why the Father talks about an exodus of this nation, of this end of days Babylon. It's very interesting, as we are having the blood moons in this country is becoming the first nation to require from every single citizen to have an implanted device.
Absolutely.
What the book of Revelation says, one of the signs of the end is the mark of the beast. People won't be able to buy and sell. For the first time in history, we have the technology to implement the mark of the beast. Interestingly, United States with IBM, United States will be the first nation to require by 2000, they want to begin in 2014. By 2015, they want every citizen to have this device, otherwise they won't be able to go to any hospital. This will have your medical record, social security, all that. So without this device, you won't be able to go to any hospital. Eventually, without it, you won't be able to buy and sell, as the book of Revelation says. That's very interesting. Now, the next harbinger that the Father showed me is this. America is not just a prophetic picture of fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah 19 and Jeremiah 51, ancient Egypt and Babylon, but also it's becoming the second Germany. Back during the Second World War, the Germans were partly financed by America. Rockefellers, New York bankers were financing the Germans, were providing oil for the German planes. When the war was over, they brought all these scientists to America. They were putting fluoride in the water in Germany for mind control. They are doing the same in America. They were building concentration camps, the same in America. Germany was becoming a totalitarian police state that ended up persecuting the Jewish people, the same America. This is a picture of the Denver airport, the biggest landing field in the entire world with an underground city. So you can see the shape of the airport is a swastika within a swastika. Now, as they brought all these scientists from Germany in Second World War, also Henry Ford was a sympathizer of the Germans. Henry Ford of Ford Motors was friend of the Nazis. The same Prescott Bush, Senator Bush, the grandfather of George Bush, he was working with them. Now, when they brought all these scientists, they began doing all these experiments, and this is a prophetic picture of the end of this nation. The airport is not just designed in the shape of a swastika, but at the entrance of the airport, and I've been there just a few months ago, so I've seen this with my own eyes, there is this horse, apocalyptic horse with red eyes, and you can see the skinny, all the ribs here and the veins of bloody horse at the entrance of the airport. This represents the horse, the pale horse of the apocalypse. The guy who built this horse died because the head of the horse fell on him, and his son needed to finish the project. So you already see the omen of this. During the pale horse of Revelation, about 25% of the people died. Now, inside the airport, we have some interesting murals. This is a Nazi soldier with a Muslim sword. Very interesting. Which guy do you know is fascist and Muslim at the same time? Exactly. So this is a Muslim sword. You can see the design clearly, but this is a Nazi sword. The cities are on fire, like Third World War. He's killing a dog that symbolizes peace. A lot of dead people here, and a rainbow. The rainbow is the sign of Noah, end of days. So this is a picture of Third World War. Now, there is a paper here that talks about 1943 and the German concentration camps. It's a document down here. The next mural, it will show us the outcome of Third World War. Next to this mural, we have this mural, and it shows us what happened after Third World War. Well, after Third World War, all the nations are making peace. They are giving up their weapons to this charismatic one world leader that is breaking the swords with a hammer. And it says peace, peace, peace. It even says here shalom, and the flag of Israel and Palestine. Here they are making peace. Here we see United Kingdom and Ireland, and all the nations are making peace, and this Nazi soldier is dead. And this is the one world leader that emerges. Who is this guy? Exactly. Now, in order to achieve a one world government, they need to achieve a one world religion. So we have Mexican Mayan girl with a Native American in this very pagan scenario about a mixture of beliefs. We see the cities destroyed by nuclear weapons in the background. And there are 3 dead women here, a black Native American and a little Christian girl, the same people the Nazis wanted to eliminate. I'm going to show you the next mural about the one world religion. Here we have a Native American doing a shamanic ceremony, and all the religions dancing together in this new world of a New Age religion. In order to achieve this plan, they need to get rid of certain people. And the picture is here of the people they want to get rid of. This is a little dead Christian girl on a coffin. It has a cross here, but on the left it has an hexagram. She has an hexagram, which is the Star of David. Jewish Christian girl. To get rid of the Jews and the Christians so they can make a one world religion. But we know that Yeshua has another plan for his people. Okay. So this is what is in the airport. Now, let us go very briefly to Ezekiel 27. And I'm just going to give you a few verses so you study at home the whole chapter of Ezekiel 27. So Ezekiel 27 talks about the destruction of Zoar, and it says, "You son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyrus." Tyrus is the English name for Zoar. It talks basically about the destruction of Tyrus. Now, it's very interesting. This is the ancient city of Tyrus that was the financial capital of the world. So when the Father brought judgment, he produced a drought in the Nile River, a famine, so that people seek him, and he brought judgment on Zoar, the financial capital of the world. Now we saw the Mississippi, that is the breadbasket of America, and America is the main breadbasket of the world, and it's beginning to dry up. So we see the harbinger of the Mississippi going the same way, but we have another Zoar, another Tyrus, that is the financial capital of the world, and this is New York. It is very interesting that in the state of New York, we have a city called Tyrus. We have a city called Babylon, and also we have a city called Tyrus. Now, in Ezekiel 28, it says, "Son of Adam, say to the prince of Tyrus," "Thus says the sovereign Adonai, because your heart is lifted up, and you have said, I am as Elohim, and I sit in the seat of Elohim." So study again this at home. Our time is very, very short. But Ezekiel 28, it talks about judgment on the king of Tyrus. And it tells us that, well, in Ezekiel 28:10, it says, "You shall die the deaths of the uncircumcised." He's talking about the king of Tyrus. And in Ezekiel 28:13, it tells us that the king of Tyrus, this ancient financial capital of the world, it says, "You have been in Eden, the garden of Elohim." So how come that the king of Tyrus was in Eden? Who was in Eden? Hasatan. Yeshua rebuked him. It says in Ezekiel 28:14, you were the anointed cherub that covered, and I have said you so. You were upon the Kadosh mountain of Elohim. Ezekiel 28:15, you were perfect in your ways from the day you were created until iniquity was found in you. Who was that? The enemy. So the king of Tyrus was Satan himself, the king of the financial capital of the world. Now we have the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and this is the sign of Washington, D.C. Who is the ruler of Washington, D.C. and New York? It's the same one, but the pattern is not changing. So now the scriptures are going to give us a last harbinger, Nahum 3:7. Put it at home. Nahum 3:7, it says, those that see you will flee from you and say, oh, Nineveh is laid waste. Before Tyrus was the financial capital of the world, Nineveh was the financial capital of the world, and when the Father brought judgment, he destroyed Nineveh, that was the financial capital of the world. Now, it's very interesting that again, in the state of New York, we have a town called Nineveh. So Ezekiel calls it Tyrus. We have a town called Tyrus in New York. Jeremiah calls it Babylon. We have a place called Babylon in New York. Isaiah calls it Egypt. We have Memphis, Tennessee, Cairo, Illinois, Alexandria, Florida, Louisiana, all these Egyptian names. And Prophet Nahum calls it Nineveh. All these different harbingers by different prophets, but it's all talking about a single place. So, why Jeremiah talks about a book of Revelation about an imminent exodus from this end of days Babylon? Because Babylon has these plans. This is a monument, the Georgia Guidestones in the state of Georgia. And they talk about, in different languages here, in these great stones, about having a one world religion, one world government, a one world court, a one world language, and to reduce the world population below 500 million. That means to eliminate 95% of the world population. So the idea is that once they reduce the world population, the Antichrist will take over. He cannot take over while we are 7 billion people. So the agenda of the United States is to begin to poison the society and to destroy the organic crops with chemtrails. The United States is the most sprayed nation on earth. It's very interesting that Nazi Germany had a company producing all this poison to gas all these ghettos and all these prisoners. Now, this company was IG Farben, that was run by the DuPont family. When the DuPont family came to America, they founded Monsanto, and Monsanto began as a chemical company, and now Monsanto moved to the food industry. These chemtrails produce Alzheimer's and destroy the soil. Also, America is the #1 GMO nation on earth. At this rate, some scientists are thinking that by 2015, about 35% of Americans will be developing some kind of cancer. Very interesting. About America produces 80% of world's GMO crops. Deuteronomy 22 tells us that we cannot put two seeds together because they will mutate. The Torah is against genetically modified crops because the Father knew they would produce cancer. So the United States is the #1 producer of GM food. Now, what the Father showed me when he showed me all this information in 2011, he sent me to this place, which is South America. And in Jeremiah 6, it talks about destruction will come from the north. So when I read this verse, he showed me that in the northern hemisphere of the world, we have 99% of the world's nuclear reactors. We have 99% of nuclear weapons. We have the most sophisticated armies, and that's going to be the main scenario of Third World War. Also, 90% of Muslims live in the northern hemisphere, north of the equator. So he showed me that South America, a place rich and abundant in natural resources, with the lowest concentration of Muslim people on earth, and chemtrails and GMOs, and one of the farthest spots on earth from Third World War, will be a key place, a refuge place for the end of days. So he sent me there to prepare a place and to give you this message so that you take it with fasting and prayer, because there will be an exodus out of this nation, and this nation will be destroyed according to the prophecies. So it is a time to seek the Father, with fasting and prayer. There are many harbingers coming all together at the same time. There is a tetrad that is coming, and this is his clock, and the Father cannot violate his clock. So this tetrad is the beginning of the tribulation. He showed me that we need to form communities, and the time for going into the wilderness is coming. And in the wilderness, he's building this, which is the true priesthood. The world is becoming so corrupted and so filthy that eventually his people will need to go into the wilderness. And the idea of the wilderness is that the Father forms the true priesthood to receive the great King that is going to rule for 1,000 years and throughout eternity. So get ready. We have to be again fasting and praying. There's going to be many people he's calling worldwide to set up communities. These communities are going to be farming communities that grow organic food and are going to be self-sufficient. Because in the world, without the microchip, eventually you won't be able to buy food. But also before the microchip shows up, with the economical collapse, people won't have money to afford food. Food is going to triple. It's going to go 5 times more, even 10 times more in some places. And most of the food that you may be able to find is not even clean organic food, but it's Monsanto food that produces cancer. The wilderness, it means a place that is desolate, very far from cities and civilization. The Father showed me that there's a coming economical collapse, as it happened in Isaiah 19 with the fall of Egypt and the fall of Babylon and the fall of Tyrus. During this economical collapse, it will give birth to civil unrest worldwide and a famine worldwide. 2015, it is 70 years since Second World War, but also 700 years since the Great Famine of 1315. During the shemitah of 1315 in Europe, it was raining non-stop for 2 months, and all the crops in Europe were destroyed and millions of people died. That was the shemitah. 700 years later is 2015 with blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. What happened just last summer in Europe? It was raining non-stop for 2 months, and they lost millions of crops. The same pattern of the Great Famine of 1315. In the last 2-3 years, we have seen the drought in the Mississippi, extreme weather patterns in United States, Canada, Europe, Russia, China, and Australia, which are the main producers of food in the world. So food shortage is coming. Now there are many dear brothers that are thinking, and this is for you to take it with fasting and prayer, to build a little community in this country. The problem is that this is a map of Agenda 21. This is a protocol presented at the United Nations right now. It was the first time it showed up in the public, it was when Bush Sr. was around, and he signed a lot of documents endorsing Agenda 21. Every single piece of land that you see here in red, green, and yellow is government regulated land. The black dots, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, the black dots are cities. And according to Agenda 21, this is where people are meant to be. So Agenda 21 wants to confiscate about 95% of the country's rural land and throw everybody into cities so that Monsanto and McDonald's can feed them. So in this country, the prophets talk. The prophecies talk of end of days exodus, because the United States has the most sophisticated technology. It's going to be the first nation to endorse this chip. While in South America, nations are still far from this technology, and this technology is going to arrive many years into the future, only when the Antichrist shows up. With more sophisticated technology like drones and chemtrails, they want to destroy the fertile soil, and with the drones, they want to scan the forest and natural areas so that they can see if there is an illegal camp or an illegal community. So this country will be the most difficult place, because not just a civil war is coming, but also it's going to be one of the centers of Third World War. By 2015, when the U.S. runs out of money, China and Russia will require their payment, and they will have a bigger economy and a bigger army by 2015. So the Father showed me in Jeremiah 51, Jeremiah told us about the exodus of the end of days Babylon. Every time there were 4 blood moons in a straight line during 2 years, in history there has been an exodus. It's something written in the heavens as a witness to us. And it happened in 1492 BC with the blood moons, Exodus of Egypt. 1492 AD, blood moons, Exodus out of Spain. It happened in 1949, 4 blood moons in Passover and Sukkot, and 1950. That's when Israel was established as a nation after 2,000 years wandering. And that was the exodus of the Jewish people from Europe. Millions of Jews left Europe to come to America, South America, and Israel. Now, this is the final exodus. It's very symbolic that Obama is in power and he's a descendant of the ancient pharaohs. Every time the children of Israel fulfilled 240 years within a major empire, there was an exodus. Israel went 240 years to Egypt. After 240 years came out of Egypt, the tetrads went into exile 240 years to Persia. Then they came out of Persia. So from 1775, the beginning of the independence movement in this country, till 2050, there's going to be 240 years again. So the pattern repeats. The prophecies talk about escaping Nineveh. Well, New York has a city called Nineveh. They talk about the destruction of Tyrus. New York has a city called Tyrus. They talk about the escape from Babylon, the most powerful nation on earth. New York has a town called Babylon. So this is a graph, because there was judgment with the ancient Pharaoh Prius, economic judgment now with Obama. The debt is reaching a ceiling that is impossible to pay. It's reaching an incredible number. So this is the basically the prophecy that Father gave me to bless you, to take it with fasting and prayer. There are many preachers preaching different things. There are many false prophets in this country as well. And what we need to do is to get confirmation in the Word. The words that I'm bringing to you are not my words. Father invented the sabbatical years. I show you throughout history what happened. He invented the blood moons. I show you throughout history what happened. Now in 2015 and 14, we are reaching a unique time in history. Blood moons with the shemitahs. Now, ancient Babylon rose to world power for 70 years. After 70 years, it was destroyed. And a little bit later on, the king of Persia ordered the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. When America falls, we're going to have Third World War. During Third World War, Israel will destroy the Muslim mosque. And they have all the plans ready to build the third temple. The Temple Institute in Israel, when I lived there, they have in a big warehouse, industrial warehouse, about 40,000 hewn stones to build the walls of the temple. They have the golden menorah, they have the golden table, the priestly garments. So they are waiting for Third World War to destroy the Muslim mosque and build the temple. According to Revelation, once this temple is built, the two witnesses show up, then the Antichrist, anti-Mashiach, and then Yeshua comes. So 2015 is the beginning of the tribulation. The tribulation doesn't last for 7 years. The book of Revelation talks about the white horse, the pale horse, talks about a world war where 1/3 of the population die. Now, once they build the temple, then we are 7 years away from the Mashiach. But before the temple is built, we need to have Third World War and many natural disasters. So Father is calling us all to repentance. He gave me Isaiah 22. When the time of judgment comes, Isaiah 22 says, I expected fasting and prayer, sackcloth and ashes, mourning and weeping. But behold, there is killing oxen and drinking wine, eating meat and drinking wine, saying, let us be glad and merry, for tomorrow we die. Sadly, this has been the attitude of America. America has had all these harbingers. This is the seventh shemitah of judgment. We had 1973, big recession and economical embargo, shemitah. 1980, big recession. 87, again economic judgment. 94, the big quake in Los Angeles, economic judgment. 2001, 2008, and now we're going to have 2015. It's going to be the seventh shemitah. 70 years since Second World War. 70 years since Franklin Roosevelt died in his office. 700 years since the Great European famine. 77 years since the beginning of the Great Depression in the United States. So it's very interesting how these patterns are repeating again. So just take this message with fasting and prayer, and I want to give a few minutes to questions and answers before we end this prophetic seminar. If anybody has a question? Yes, brother?
Is there anything you could think of that we as a country are to repent of that is going to make any kind of difference?
Well, what is going to make a difference is you. He's calling you and me, all of us, to repent. And he's calling us, first of all, to come out of the spiritual Babylon, which are the religions of the world. But eventually, he also is calling us the final exodus out of Babylon, and he's calling us to become this in the wilderness. You know, when the mark of the beast comes and all that technology, Yeshua will require from us to leave everything behind. There will be a time when we will need to leave everything behind. And every shemitah is the year of visitation for the wicked, but also is the year of preparation for believers. So the next shemitah, what are we going to be doing since we know all this judgment is coming? Are we going to be just watching television and taking vacation trips and living a random life? Or we're going to be fasting, praying, and we're going to be in the exact location that Father is calling us to be, to become this? Are we going to dedicate the whole shemitah to prayer, to follow Him mightily, to study His Word, to really become a monument to the Word of the Father? Or we're going to be living a random life? So in the shemitah, He's calling all of us to repent. We already saw the failures of Christianity and rabbinical Judaism. And I'm beginning to see big failures within the Messianic community. A lot of people are talking about the calendar. There are like 5 different calendars. Everybody's coming with a calendar. There are about a zillion different ways to pronounce the name of the Father. There are people are arguing about my tzitzit have 10 knots and your tzitzit have 7 knots. And we are arguing and we're getting divided when Yeshua told us that those that are truly His disciples, the world will recognize them by the love they have for one another. So it is time to put all these childish games and really come together as a community, as a body, loving body of believers, a community that is anointed with the fire and the power of Yeshua HaMashiach, a community that works with the power of the community of Book of Acts chapter 2. In order to walk with that power and that fire, we need to surrender our whole lives to Yeshua. So sadly, as great division came to Christianity and rabbinical Judaism and many other religions, the same attack is coming to the Messianic communities, and we need to be awakened. We really need to be awakened. Yes, sister?
In Revelation 11, it speaks of when the 2 witnesses are finally fall at the hand of the Antichrist. And it says that they lay in the city known as Babylon, Egypt. Would you say that that kind of applies to America at the same time that we're Babylon, Egypt as well?
Well, actually, that talks about Jerusalem.
Okay.
You know, once the U.S. will be destroyed, the most powerful city will be Jerusalem. You know, they are also trying to rebuild the ancient city of Babylon. So he calls Sodom and Gomorrah and Egypt to a very unclean place, and the reference is to Jerusalem because it says that's the city where the Master was impaled. So Jerusalem will be so profane that the Father needs to name this holy city with this very profane name because of the quality. Yes, brother?
You know, in the prophets, it talks about His people coming from the north, the south, and the east, and the west. And I always thought that was a prophetic picture of coming back, like an exodus, back to the land. But what you're saying is it's not necessarily the case because we have to find sanctuaries away from the New World Order, Babylon, or whatever.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile those scriptures with the sanctuary, let's say, in South America versus going back to the land?
Well, when we read end of days prophecy, Jeremiah 24 talks about escape from Israel. Jeremiah had a vision of a basket with ripe figs and rotten figs, and the Father told him the ripe figs are those that were deported from Israel for their own welfare. But the rotten figs are King Zedekiah and his princes that I'm going to leave in the middle of Jerusalem. So they will be destroyed. So Isaiah 4 also talks about an exodus from Jerusalem. And Jeremiah 51 talks about the exodus from Babylon. So throughout the scriptures, you know, when we study end of days prophecy, there's going to be 2 nations on earth that are going to be in about 80% of end of days prophecy. And these are Israel and America. Why? Because the simple reason that Israel is the promised land, and there are about 5 million Jews in Israel. And America, there are about 40 million Jews and many millions of Christians. So wherever you see his people, that's going to be the center of prophecy. Prophecy is not around Australia, Guatemala, South Africa, Zimbabwe, China. Prophecy, end of days prophecy, most prophecies will talk about Israel and America for the simple reason his people is there. That's why he says, come out of here, my people. So when you study end of days prophecy, Jeremiah warned us of escaping Israel and Babylon. Why? If you go right now to Israel, what are you going to face there?
Persecution.
War? And then who is coming to Israel? The anti-Messiah. So in Israel, you want to be there when the true Messiah comes. Because if you are there, before the Messiah comes, it's going to be one of the worst places on earth. The son of perdition is going to be ruling in that land. Before he becomes the Antichrist, Third World War, Israel is going to be one of the main centers of Third World War, which is going to be a nuclear war. Now America, in the same way, is going to be one of the centers of civil war and nuclear war. So that's why the prophets, they don't talk about the exodus of Guatemala or Zimbabwe or the Philippines, but they mention 3 key prophecies: to flee the north. In the northern hemisphere, we see 99% of the nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors, chemtrails, radiation. The most powerful armies in the world. And the 90% of the Muslims live north of the equator. That's going to be the main center of persecution of the World War. And then they tell us to flee this end of days Babylon, the most powerful nation on earth, whose capital is the great harlot, the great city by the waters where the World Trade is, New York. Then they tell us about escape Israel. So it's interesting that if we follow this pattern, again, south of the equator in South America, we have the lowest amount of Muslims on earth, magnetic radiation, chemtrails, very rich in natural resources, and is one of the farthest places from Third World War scenario. This is what he's showing. There is people that he's calling in China, to build a place of safety, some mountains of the Himalayas. There's going to be a little remnant in Pakistan and Afghanistan and in maybe many other nations, and also in Africa and the Philippines. What he revealed to me is that this place is a strategic place.
One other question.
Yeah.
So then the so-called Christians for Israel, or the Christian Zionists, and say the Zionists in Israel, the Jewish Zionists, are they going down the wrong? Are they false teachers?
Well, there are many branches of that. There are Zionists that love Israel in many different ways. There are Zionists that love Israel and they finance Israel, but they are giving money to the wrong institutions. They are financing Orthodox Judaism, that with that money, all they want to do is to kill and kicked out of the country the Messianic Jews. So it's not exactly the right people to finance. So within the Zionist movement, you have people with many different agendas. The global elite, their agenda is to build the third temple of the anti-Messiah. So there are many different agendas. So some preachers say, give me some gold because we're going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Yeah, but that's going to be the temple of the beast. It's not going to be the temple of the true Messiah. I'm not giving a penny to build that temple at all. Yes,
Did I understand you to say that the temple is to be rebuilt
yes,
in Jerusalem?
yeah.
And then the Messiah comes there's a seven.
He comes 7 years later. When you see the third temple built in Jerusalem, the 2 witnesses prophesy for 3 years and a half. Then the Antichrist comes for 3 years and a half, and then Yeshua, the true Messiah, he comes to reign. So once you see the third temple built, the true Mashiach is 7 years away.
Well, I've also heard about they were going to start sacrificing.
Yeah, they will. But that's we are not going to be partakers of that. That's a temple of witchcraft.
Well,
The third temple is being financed by Bush. I was there in Jerusalem. He signed a document with a rabbi in Jerusalem who is the head of the Temple Institute. Bush is member of the Skull and Bones Satanic Society. And all these societies, what they wanted for hundreds of years is to rebuild the third temple so they can worship the son of perdition. The third temple is a work of the occult, of masonry, and it's an abomination. It has nothing to do with us. We don't need to go there. We don't need to offer any sacrifices. Only when Yeshua comes back, he will establish the true priesthood. But anything before him is of the enemy.
Ezekiel. That's all Ezekiel.
Yes?
Kind of go backward, I guess, and rethink all of this, because the prevailing teaching has been among those that watch this that that very soon there'll be 1,260 days left, and that you should shelter in a wilderness place. That there would be two parts of it. That the Pesha, where we're gathering, and then the Zechirah, where the covenants we established. That would happen in kind of a compact period of time. And those 260 days.
Yeah, let me answer this before you go further on. This is a wrong doctrine. A lot of people say the end is not coming till you see the temple built. This is a very, very wrong doctrine. When you read the book of Revelation, we're going to have the pale horse where 25% of humanity is wiped out. We're going to have the red horse where millions die, and the black horse, worldwide famine, and the white horse, black horse, a worldwide famine, the white horse, world civil unrest. Then we have many natural disasters, and then we have a war where 33% of the world's population is wiped out. And then we have the third temple built. So people are missing the two seasons of judgment. By the time we get to the third temple, about 80% of the world population is wiped out. You know, the preparation begins when the opening of the seals of the book of Revelation with Third World War. With Third World War begins the apocalypse. So we're going to have Third World War, natural disasters, a war where 33% of the world population is wiped out, and then is when they build the third temple. So our season of wilderness is before this shemitah of 2015. Actually, by 2014, we will see blood moons. We got to be positioned. I'm going to give you an example. You remember that 6 million Jews died in Germany in concentration camps? What about if a prophet came to them and told them, get out of Germany because the end is coming, and they say, no, the temple is not built. This is a very wrong association. When the temple is built, that's the very end. But when you read carefully the book of Revelation, before the third temple is built, we have Third World War and many natural disasters where about 80% of the world population is at war. So we have to go to the wilderness. 2014 is actually the year of the wilderness, where we have to be positioned for the coming economical meltdown. Just 1 second. She has another question, please.
Well, I just wanted to say, so by Passover 2014, we should have already sought the Father about this and be where He called us to be.
Well, this is definitely a time for fasting and prayer. As I see the way the economy is heading to everything that is happening worldwide, 2014 is the year where we need to be positioned.
Okay.
About,
And you're talking about out of the United States.
well, this is the revelation that Father gave me. Now, what you need to do is to seek the Father with fasting and prayer, that He guides you and that He gives you 3 times confirmation to see where you're going to be set up. Because eventually, in the U.S., eventually, as I said, it has the most sophisticated technology to force everybody to be inside the
It's the
system.
most dangerous place I know.
And all the chemtrails, and it's going to be the center of the World War. So eventually, there is an exodus now. People need to seek the Father with fasting and prayer and see the door that the Father is opening for each one. He called me to build this place. If any of you receive the revelation to join our community, I'm going to provide you with email and phone number. And if we can help you with logistics of any country in South America, we came to bless you. And anybody that feels that calling is welcome to come. And Father just told me to build this place, and I did it by faith. And He told me there's going to be an exodus. And He told me that many people from this country will end up in the South. Yes, brother?
How do you see Ephraim and Judah, the 10 tribes, this whole thing?
Well, this is a big theological question completely out of the picture. The main thing is to get ready for what is coming. Now, me personally, the way I see Ephraim and Judah, when I go to Genesis, Joseph and Judah is the reconciliation of Messiah with Israel. But also Joseph is a picture of the Messianic believers that in a time in the future will be reconciled with Orthodox Judaism. And Orthodox Judaism, a remnant of them, will recognize that Yeshua is the Mashiach. So eventually there's going to be a reconciliation, but this is something that happens in the very end.
So Isaiah 11 is not coming.
No. At the very end, when the temple is built and many of the Orthodox Jews see the Antichrist, then they will remember that the book of Revelation is true. And then many will cry out and see that everything Yeshua said is true. So at the very end, there will be an awakening. Yes?
You got any insight on reevaluation of the world's currency and how that money invested in wisely might be used for this exodus?
Well, Father showed me something interesting. To diversify about 25% of your assets, between 25 to 30, should be invested in gold and silver. They are suppressing the price of gold and silver because they are afraid of people buying it. But this is nonsense. In 5,000 years, for 5,000 years of history, if you had a gold coin or a silver coin in your pocket, you could be in China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Israel, South America, and it was worthy a lot. I mean, it had a huge value. So as the dollar collapses, the price of metal is going to go incredibly high. Right now they have been keeping the price down because they are afraid of people acquiring so much, and they want to deceive them to make them think that it's going to go down, but this is impossible. When they bring a new world currency, before that moment when the dollar is shattered, the metals will go very high. Then another 20-30% we need to have supplies, food, first aid kit, all sorts of supplies, clean water, all the supplies we may need. And then another 30% will need equipment, whether solar panels, water filters, camping equipment, survival equipment, all that. Some people like to have hunting equipment, so when the famine comes, you can hunt deer or elk or whatever, and also you can defend yourself. And at 10%, people should have cash. Also, not just dollars, but it can be Swiss francs, so you will be able to gamble with different currencies as this is collapsing. So these are the four main factors, that you want to think about. You want to think supplies, equipment,